Let's talk a little bit about development. Let's talk about development camp through the Stuckey Cup. Also, Dan Bylsma joins Signals from the Deep with what was a very thoughtful and illuminating, shall we say, conversation with Nick Olczyk. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Kraken.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey to the hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team every single day. I hope you enjoyed the extended holiday for those who had off. For those like me who are working in various capacities, we appreciate you, and hopefully you'll get a little bit of rest and relaxation coming up. If we're meeting for the first time, my name is Erica L. Ayala. I've been your host of Locked On Kraken from the very beginning, from the first ever expansion draft, and of course through the most recent draft. We just had development camp, and we'll have preseason and training camp coming up, where I expect to be in the Pacific Northwest. If you're not looking for my hockey coverage, you can find my women's basketball coverage at CBS Sports, and of course my outlet, Black Rosie Media, where we empower Black women and melanated creators in sports media. Before we get too deep into the details, want to let you know today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. We know the playoffs have wound down, and like I said, the WNBA, the Olympics winding up. FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. And I'll tell you more about that a little bit later. But I want to get to the Stuckey Cup. For those who do not know, the Stuckey Cup is our development camp tournament trophy. Now, it has an origin story, but before we get into the origin story too much, I do want to let you know what we saw in development camp, because I think it was a good dev camp for the Kraken organization. And again, I said we're gonna get into an interview that Dan Bylsma did with Nick Olczyk on the official Seattle Kraken podcast, and he talks about the approach to dev camp. And again, we'll get into that a little bit more. But the Stuckey Cup, it was Ty Nelson once again for Team Blue defending the title. And Ty Nelson had a pretty stacked roster, including himself. For those who are not familiar, Ty Nelson and his team won the Stuckey Cup last year. But Team Blue, again, you had the aforementioned Ty Nelson, as well as Charlie Wright, Caden Hamill, William Graham, Remington Nopel, Leighton Road, who we talked about when it came to the AHL playoffs. Let's see, who else do we have here? Berkeley Catton, Jaeger Furcus, Oscar Fisker Molgard. So yeah, Justin Janicki, Ben McDonald, just a stacked roster. And Team Robertson included, of course, Tucker Robertson. We've had him on the podcast before, especially during his stop with the Mavericks. Edward Schala, Carson Reinkampf, Barrett Hall, David Goyette on the blue line, Lucas Dragivicic, Viking Gustafsson, Caden Price, and Victor Osman as the goaltenders, just to name a few of the names. If you're part of our Locked On Kraken insider community, then I sent you these rosters on the 5th. And so it was a pretty one-sided affair. Ty Nelson and Team Blue defended their title with a 7-2 victory over Team White in the final day of Dev Camp. That is the back-to-back Stuckey Cup champions, as the Seattle Kraken account laid out for us. And, it's always interesting to see how prospects are going to respond to this. It's an opportunity for them to re-engage. They had media training with Allison Lucan. They have a chance, of course, to get on the ice with the coaching staff and to get a lay of the land, especially those who are new to the organization. But I want to take you to the origin of the Stuckey Cup and some of the quotes of how people are seeing the Stuckey Cup. This is a diary entry by the ever amazing Allison Lucan, and you can find it on NHL.com/Kraken. And so I'm going to read through here. Jeff Tambellini, who we heard from on the last day of Dev Camp, talked about a lot of teams have different tournaments that they put on, but it was really about creating culture and tradition. And so in that vein, they wanted to have a trophy and have it named after someone. And it just so happened that they named it after James Stuckey. And this is what James had to say. I found out the day before the tournament last year that the trophy was getting named after me. Tambellini, told me he wanted to create a culture and history within development camp. He said, well, we have to have a trophy. And the next thing you know, it's named after me. And that's pretty cool. Now, they talk about how the trophy doesn't look too big right now, but that they put the names of the winning team on the trophy, like we see in a lot of hockey trophies. And so every 4 years, they're going to add a ring because of how the Stuckey Cup is set up. I mentioned Leighton Road. We haven't talked about the tournament too much yet. This is obviously before the tournament that Allison published this. We've been focused on what we've been doing, but I'm sure the trash talking will ramp up as it gets closer. That's what makes it fun. That's what makes winning it so much better. Ty Nelson, again, this was before he went back to back. Winning last year was amazing. We had a great group of guys. We had a lot of fun playing, and I know it meant a lot to win both to our team and our staff. It's going to be fun defending that title on Friday, which he did. So I just think this is a lot of fun. Overall, what I took away from development camp, and again, this is something that Dan Bylsma said in his interview with Nick Olczyk. He talked about how you're not making, or for that matter, not making the Seattle Kraken roster, or I mean, I would extend that to any roster, from this. This is just something that's for the youngins, but it is a chance for them, again, to get a handle of the culture and to give the staff an understanding of what they need and how perhaps they can fit in. So I do want to talk about other things that happened at Dev Camp, which are very directly related in one case to the Seattle Kraken roster, and that is that the Seattle Kraken agreed to terms with Eeli Tolvanen, 2-year contract, 2-year, $3.475 AAV. Now, I talked about this before on Friday with Armando Velez. If you watch that Squadcast or crossover episode, I said that we were waiting on the news here. We also got news that our first round pick in the 2024, the most recent draft, Catton, we signed him as well. Now, Catton signed a 3-year entry-level contract, $975 AAV. He was our 8th pick overall. I thought we were going to go D, but we went with a forward. He is playing with the Spokane Chiefs right now in the Western Hockey League. Quote, we are excited to have Berkeley sign his first professional contract. He brings elite hockey sense and an ability to score in a high compete level. He has had an impressive 3 seasons in the WHL, and we look forward to seeing him continue to develop. So really cool. He signed on the ice, which is a little bit of a Seattle Kraken tradition as well when we can have it happen. And so actually the Seattle Kraken, they announced Catton and had him sign, and then Ron Francis was on the ice and said, oh, hey, we weren't going to say this, but I can let you know now that Eeli Tolvanen is coming back. So if you ever have a chance to go to Kraken Community Iceplex and go to the open practices. Even better if you're a season ticket holder and you can go to some of the closed practices. I highly recommend it, especially during development camp, because again, it's been a little bit of the the culture and tradition of the Seattle Kraken to announce some big news right there on the ice. Coming up next, though, I want to get into the coaching. And what we're going to do throughout this week is I'm going to spend at least one segment every day talking about the coaching staff. And we're going to start with Dan Bylsma. Again, I got to listen to Signals from the Deep. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think Nick did a great job facilitating, and there's a little bit of history there with the Olczyk family. So I'm sure that made it a little bit easier. But I really want to, I'm not going to play any clips. I really think you should listen to it. It's free and available. I'll leave you the link in the show notes. But I really enjoyed the interview, and I continually enjoy speaking to Dan. That's been from interviews that I've had with him, when I hear him speak overall. And I think he's going to, even just from that perspective, bring something fresh and new to the Seattle Kraken. So coming up next, I will give you my takeaways from the Dan Bylsma interview. And then also we're going to talk about the schedule. That's right. The schedule had been released all, within the draft and some of our free agent signings, but we did this last year. I want to do it again this year. Let's go, month by month, and I'll give you the dates that stand out to me. We'll also talk on this episode just about some of the things overall to be mindful of with the schedule, including how you can get your tickets. That's coming up next on Locked On Kraken. Mentioned it at the top, but today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. And listen, I'm not buying into this as a slow time. We've got the Olympics, we've got WNBA, NWSL, and so much more happening over the summer. And the great thing is that FanDuel has got you covered for Major League Baseball, WNBA, and more. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. Whether you want to take a look at the over-unders and the spreads for your M's, the Marlins, whether you want to take a look at where the Seattle Storm fare when it comes to the championship odds in the WNBA. I think they're getting a lot better for the Storm as we head into the All-Star break in the WNBA. But you can find all of that on FanDuel, because FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball and, of course, of us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Erica L. Ayala here. I mentioned Locked On Podcast Network, but don't forget to check out Locked On Sports Today. That's our 24/7 streaming channel. You are going to get the channel programmed directly for you, bringing you the biggest stories from our experts. Locked On Sports Today brings you analysis that you can't miss, the opinions that you want, and the news that you need. Streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, now I want to take you to Signals from the Deep. Signals from the Deep, again, is the Seattle Kraken specific podcast. So that's right. The Seattle Kraken have their very own podcast. It's hosted by Nick Olczyk. And the most recent episode features Disco Dan Bylsma. And almost right off the bat, Nick is giving us everything that we want, which is, at least for me, the most detailed account of how Dan Bylsma got his nickname. And I don't want to spoil everything, but you move around in your professional hockey career, and eventually you're going to get a veteran. You're on a team with a veteran that either has your name or your number, or in Dan's case, your nickname. And so it was like, nope, that's my nickname. You've got to find another one. And he talks about how there was a laundry list of options for him, and how ultimately Disco became the winner. What I also liked, and outside of the Disco nickname that came out not just early in the conversation, but throughout the conversation. And it really helped me place some of the things that I like about Dan Bylsma is that he talks about his passion and love for competing. He talks about being a multi-sport athlete, but he talks about, why he loves hockey, what he loves about what he does. And he even later in the episode talks about his transition to coaching, which I freaking loved. He talked about at some point in his playing career that he would just start taking notes. He would start taking notes of everything from drills to attitude and approach in his coaching staff, and things that he liked and the things that he didn't like. And he talks about having notebooks, but also sometimes just random pieces of paper, from like the little Post-its or whatever that they give you at the hotel. And he also had a coach that started to see that he was doing that. And as I was listening to that, I kept thinking, and we're going to talk later in the week about Jessica Campbell, but I kept thinking about that quote that I posted on social media on the Locked On Kraken Twitter account, and that Dan helped Jessica when she realized that she wanted to change something about, how she was approaching her hockey career as a staff member. And Dan helped her see what that vision could be. And I think that's because Dan did that for himself, but also had someone do that for him. And what I mean is, again, those notepads, he says he had multiple notebooks. Him and his father wrote books. He just has a very intelligent, he processes high on the Bloom taxonomy. I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to leadership development. If you're an everyday or an OG, this about me. And I just really liked it. I liked his approach. And it also speaks to some of the things that I think we can expect from the Disco Dan era. We've been talking about the first 100 days. I'm a poli-sci major, so the first 100 days is usually how you address and how you evaluate leadership. Are things working? Are they not working? It's about 100 days till you figure out, what you need to do and how you can course correct if needed, or what you want to lean into a little bit more. It is very clear. We've talked about this before on the podcast, but it is very clear that Dan and Jessica and Bob and everybody else on the staff, he even, talked about some of the staff that is a rollover from our first few seasons. He wants to create an environment where he continually is developing players. And I love that Nick asked, because we know Dan Bylsma spent time with the Pittsburgh Penguins. And I love that Nick asked, hey, is it different, trying to coach a player who, like a Sidney Crosby? Is it tough to coach a player like that when there's so much on this person, right? There's so much about how this is a transformational, generational player. And I really liked Dan's answer. And I think also Sidney Crosby is just a really good example to give, because it sounds like, at least from Dan's perspective, that Sidney Crosby leans into the process as well. And it was interesting to hear Dan Bylsma talk about Sidney. He also joked, like, I don't want to say too many nice things about him because I got to coach against him. So I thought that was funny, and goes into what I said earlier. He is a competitor through and through, and I freaking love that. And how is this team going to play? They're going to play aggressive. They're going to play fast. He talks a little bit more in the podcast episode about why he thinks playing fast is important, including that the beauty of hockey, and I agree with him here, the beauty of hockey is because it is a beautiful game that can be played at a high octane, high pace, very fast. And what I took from what he was saying is that he wants to honor the game. He wants to honor the excitement of the game. And also honor the fact that, there's a lot of things that you can do. And he describes, how in hockey we say play, north versus what playing fast is. And I really liked, again, how he's able to break this down, the cognitive recognition of how those things are not exactly the same, but how they both contribute to being able to win hockey games. I really liked. And again, I think the way he talks about his staff is really powerful. And I'm excited to see how everything fares because there is going to be a focus on development at every single point in this coaching staff. There's going to be a focus on development, not just, of course, of the players and the development or the players that were participated in development camp. But if I had to guess, there's also going to be a little bit of that happens among the coaching staff. We already talked about how Bob Woods is going to handle the power play and Jessica Campbell will work under him. I like that. I think there's opportunity though for growth and an expectation that the coaching staff is going to work in unison, and they're going to truly be a staff and not individuals that happen to be on the same staff. So I really like that. I really, really like that. There's so much from that interview. I highly recommend that you listen to it. So check the show notes because it's there, or you can just head over to nhl.com/Kraken and find Signals from the Deep, hosted by Nick Olczyk. 10 out of 10 recommend. Coming up next, let's get into the schedule. That's right. The Seattle Kraken have released the schedule, and I'll give you a brief overview, some things to point out when we have our longest home stretches, when we have our longest road stretches, and then we'll focus on October. And something that Dan keeps mentioning that one shows me his competitive edge and his focus, but also might be a little bit of a dig in what is a very odd schedule, at least in my estimation. That's coming up on this episode of Locked On Kraken. So thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Make sure you check out Locked On NHL. Go check out Locked On Florida Panthers. That was our most recent squadcast, and I'm hoping we have another squadcast or two. You're also not going to want to miss later in the week. I will give the chance for our Locked On Kraken insiders to maybe ask a question or two to a very special guest that we're going to have coming up. We'll record this week, and it will probably go live later in the month. As some of you know, I'm traveling to Paris for the Paris Olympics, the Summer Olympics 2024. And so we're starting to batch some interviews. And this is an interesting, it's not a traditional squadcast, but it is something that's a little unique and interesting, especially for those of you who maybe like to do your own podcasts or you're into tech and gear and stuff like that. I think you're really going to like this special guest. But I want to talk about the schedule. The schedule has been released. We talked about the preseason schedule already, but the Seattle Kraken will open their season at home against the St. Louis Blues. And the puck drop, 1:30 p.m. Pacific time. A little bit strange, but the reason is, at least in part, that there's a little bit of history being made. And so per the Kraken website, there is going to be a little bit of a unique situation in where the NHL itself has, like, I think 3 games on tap for opening night. So that's going to be interesting. And I'm just curious to see how it all goes down. Yeah, it's the first North American NHL game of the season. So that's why we're so early. And it kicks off a triple header of league action that day. So, I mean, that's interesting. But yeah, the world is going to be watching the Seattle Kraken. So that's, kind of cool. Other notes and nuggets regarding the schedule. Again, the Seattle Kraken will open at home, but then from there, we see that the Seattle Kraken will play Minnesota, Dallas, and of course we get Nashville in October. Minnesota, Dallas, and Nashville. We might have to do an early squad cast with Locked On Wild because now we've got a direct connect, and Seth is helping us out here on the back end of things. And then after that, so that's the first 3 road games are 3 of 5 in October. October will see 6 games at Climate Pledge Arena, including 5 consecutive, starting with Philadelphia. That's going to be on October 17th, then Calgary on October 19th, Colorado on October 22nd, Winnipeg on the 24th, Carolina on the 26th, and then the final 2 away games are Montreal on the 29th and Toronto on the 31st. Some things to keep in mind here. The longest stretch of games at Climate Pledge Arena will be later in the year in November. We'll talk about that when we do the November schedule. That will be 6 straight matchups, including the only back-to-back where we actually play the 2 New York teams in the Islanders and the Rangers. There will be 2 5-game road trips, one in October, or excuse me, from October 29th to November 5th. So I gave you the first 2 of that stretch. And then also in January at the top of the year. We'll talk about this when we go over the November schedule, or excuse me, the December schedule, Utah. So again, we got a relocation of Arizona, very messy, but anyway. And then we also get the Florida Panthers in December, which will be interesting. So again, I'll break some of this down, but there are a few different ways if you did want to get tickets that you can do that. They've got the Weekend Warriors pack, the home opener pack. You can do the giveaway pack. So if you want to make sure you go on days where there is a giveaway, it includes 6 games that fall on giveaway nights. Still want to arrive early to ensure you get the gifts. Some of them are pretty sweet. There's a family fun pack. And there will also, once again, be community-focused nights like Black History Night, Pride, Lunar New Year, and more. Those aren't going away. We know that the NHL made a really dumb decision, in my obviously very strong opinion, to not have those warm-up jerseys. But I really liked what the Seattle Kraken did last year. They actually had an art exhibit. That was super cool. So we will keep you updated on all of that. Overall, hard to say what I feel about the strength of schedule, at least right now, because we're still in free agency. I mean, obviously, strength of schedule, at least in part, goes by what the teams did last year. So you look at Dallas, Nashville, Colorado, Winnipeg, Carolina, and Toronto in October. And we're a team that did not make the playoffs. So there you go. So that's going to be a good test for Dan Bylsma right out the gate, playing teams that were able to play extra hockey, right? Beyond the regular season. We did not reach that. And it was disappointing to not get there again. And we've talked about this. The expectation is that Dan Bylsma is going to get us there. So really good test early on. And again, we'll talk about the November schedule coming up here, but maybe a little bit more of a forgiving schedule, but also some teams that personally I just love to see us play. That's our show, folks. You know how we do. Remind you to be kind to yourself, because when you're able to really focus and do that on a consistent basis, compound that, and then it allows us to be more kind to others. But we always say, hold fast, stay true, and loud and proud, let's go Kraken. I'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.